Hello, this is Alan Wheeler on my channel where I often talk about tarot and spirituality, continuing my series that I'm calling Devil's Advocate, doing dark readings of, it has been Genesis and now moving into Exodus from the Hebrew Bible, translated into English. So let me continue with my custom of tearing out the first passage, Exodus chapter 4. And I'm going to mark it up and take it captive in the spirit of the left-hand path to self, to my own thinking. And again, I'll post my disclaimer if I remember. But, and I know some people will find this blasphemous and appropriating inappropriately, but I should note that in copyright law, which can be compared by analogy to what I'm doing, that companies complain and brand names and corporations complain most about that which is permitted most, protected most by law and by the courts, which is responding to what the companies, what the organizations put out there, so that if the company has the right to put this out to the public has a right to respond, whether in satire or parody, and that's why these tend to be most protected. So if it's transformative, that's protected most by law. And so what I'm talking about is not other than by analogy similar to cultural appropriation, but it's rather taking this captive and transforming it into a new paradigm for myself. Now, the story I'm looking at from Exodus 4 is of Moses in the wilderness, and he's given some powerful signs that he is on a mission from God. And he's asking, how will they know? And so he's told to throw his staff onto the ground, and it becomes a serpent, and it's wriggling there on the ground, and he's commanded to put out his hand and catch it by the tail, even though he's just run away from it in fear. So he seems to face his fear, puts out his hand and catches it, and it becomes a staff again. And so this is going to be a sign that he is sent from God. And he's given another sign as well. But this one has an ancient history that goes probably back to Sumerian mythology, and we're familiar with the rod of Asclepius, which has the serpent entwined around it. Which is often the sign of medicine and healing. And so and we also know from the caduceus that was carried in the left hand of Hermes, entwined by two serpents, that the serpent and staff are associated mystically. And if we fast forward a couple thousand years to the time of Jesus, he tells his followers to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And so we seem to see this kind of integration as Moses can pick up the serpent, which we know from the earlier Genesis story is the wisest, craftiest, most subtle of all creatures. So we have this interesting experience in the wilderness. Now again, we see the staff with the serpents in the Egyptian court with the magicians or the priests of the Pharaoh. And so I'm also going to take out the passage from Exodus chapter 7 when Moses is before the court of the Pharaoh. And this is the big initial confrontation there. And he takes his staff and he casts it down, and he does this miraculous performance again, and it became a serpent. But then we see Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers and the magicians of Egypt, and they did the same by their secret arts. So this is quite interesting. However, Aaron's staff is swallowed up by their, Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. So what we see here seems to be a difference in quantity, not quality. In other words, they did the same, but Moses' trick was more powerful, was better than theirs. And so the whole story there in Exodus with the battles between the gods of the Egyptians and the God of Moses, up to a certain point, they're duplicating his feats. When the water turns to blood, they also turn the water to blood of the Nile, and so on. And then it reaches a point where they can't duplicate it anymore. So again, we get this idea that this God is stronger. Now, some people have posited that there's an evolution going on, and that in the lower state, the supposed lower state, there's polytheism and a lot of different gods, and the tribe that's winning, their God is winning in the heavens, and that can turn around. Then that this supposedly develops into, I think it's called henotheism anyway. There's one God that is, there's many gods, but one is the Most High. So the God Most High is more powerful than all these other ones. That seems to be what's going on here, that they still can do these miracles, but we get this story where the greatest, the Most High beats all the other ones. And then, again, according to the evolutionary kind of model, then monotheism becomes the highest, most civilized state, in which there's one true God and the rest are demons or false gods. So another way to look at this would be that it's not evolutionary, but maybe revolutionary. And so you have an experience, a phenomenon where, whether psychologically or sociologically, there's an experience of many deities, and that can shift and change to a state where there's just one, or a state where your God is the highest, the best, maybe for you or your group. And that these different experiences have different purposes or different functions, not necessarily a progressive evolution where one is higher than the other. So this is just food for thought for me, and I'm going to, as in the previous videos, crumple these up and put these in my cauldron and continue thinking about this. But as I do consider these different approaches, I have to admit that it seems that there is a useful function or a power in having this center. And so we find many people they seek their identity. Who am I? And to have a code, to follow a code, and so on. But I believe, similar to law in some of the ancient, whether the Babylonian or the Hebrew, where the law is written in stone, quite heavy-handed and top down, there's also uses of law where it's more democratic, where it's more motivated from within, where there's a contract that's developed between people rather than from a dictator, and so on. And so similar to this idea that the law can be used in kind of a left-hand path way, so can some of these other things, like the idea of covenant, that's more so that pagans work with their gods on a more equal footing. I'm reminded in talking about finding this center, rather than just saying there is no center, the center cannot hold, and this kind of postmodern lostness, I'm reminded of an experiment I read about some years ago, and the participants were asked to play in a computer program that recreated a city, and they could travel anywhere among the buildings and along the streets and the parks, and they became quite lost within the program. But when they put crosshairs, kind of a center point that they could return to, they became more engaged and able to work with the program. So the center was nothing sacred. It could have been placed anywhere in the program, in the city, but they needed that place, that home base to return to be able to work with this scenario. In a similar way, we know that Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, and I can move the world." So it may not matter where the axis mundi is, and it may be in a different place for these different cultures, but it may be a very useful thing to have functionally. And so having a center, but knowing that it can change and evolve, having a code of ethics or of contracts, but knowing it's something progressive that's based on the individuals involved, not some, perhaps not a divine word, never changing, written in stone. and similarly with covenants and fellowships and groups. And in this case, the left-hand path does offer a more well-rounded approach, and progressive, revolutionary, self-originating, sometimes transgressive, always dissenting. So this exploring the sacred scriptures with this approach can be very helpful. So thank you so much for watching, and take care. See you in the next video.